Hello, I'm Sam Gerrans. Today is Saturday, 20th of April, 2024, and today we're going to look at the question of whether the Qur'an copies previous scriptures. All right, so today what I want to do is to get into the question of whether the Qur'an copies or repeats or steals from previous scriptures. What I'm trying to do here is really pump my audience for input. I don't normally answer questions on my YouTube. I always answer questions on my Substack if there is an answer to be given, but not on my YouTube, generally speaking. And I won't hear, but I will read them, and if they use any input that's coming. Now, the reason why I'm addressing this is because this is one of the two kind of main projects that I'm interested in this phase of the work. And the backstory to this is if you've been doing this as long as I have, you'll realize, or you'll already know, that there are basically fashions which come in and out, breeze their way in and out of Qur'an alone or Quranic studies sort of space. At the moment, it's the idea that there's more than one Qur'an, and etc. And people get very excited about it, and then they forget about it. And quite often, I'm not saying this is the case here, but quite often what you find is that there are particular interests who've been financed to push this sort of story for a while. The common thread between this and whether the Qur'an, sort of Muhammad lifted things from previous scriptures, is that what I notice is that people very often get excited about things that they don't really know, or they put it more specifically, they don't have any specifics about. So they've heard somebody say something which the Qur'an is written in sort of crypto Syriac, and somebody has an opinion, but his book hasn't got a name to it, and it's a pseudonym, and he makes some assertions and uses some sort of seemingly academic language, and people get thrown about by that. And then I receive emails which usually include the word "just." Could you just sort this problem out? But really, often, I'm not saying it's true in all cases, but often, what it is that people have an impression, rather than if you actually looked at the specifics of what the accusations are, you'd find that they don't really amount to much. Anyway, leaving all that to one side, I can only handle one thing at a time. Right now I'm doing this. It is an interesting question about whether the Qur'an, how it relates to previous scriptures. It's objectively the case that the Qur'an treats of similar stories which existed prior to the revelation of the Qur'an. It not only does so, it doesn't do so covertly, it trumpets the fact. What I find is that the accusation, certainly from often Christian quarters or atheistic quarters, they have their, what I rather disparagingly call, what they call them, factoids. They'll have a factoid, and that's their answer. The Qur'an itself says that they've rejected this Qur'an without having understood even 1/10. It doesn't say they have understood 1/10. They said they haven't even understood 1/10, and they've already rejected it. That's on them. It's not my business to make people believe something or anything at all. It's my business to do my own due diligence, and insofar as I'm able to and have the time to share that. Some people do support that, and that's appreciated. Most people don't. They just take your stuff and assume that it's all free and that no work's gone into it, etc., etc. We're living in a time of almost universal delusion, so that shouldn't surprise us. I'm not the only person who suffers from this. Anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning this is, as part of my main interest at the moment, is to do some sort of structured analysis of how and where the Qur'an relates to previous scripture. What you find, generally speaking, is that, especially going back to our good friends the Christians, or certain types of Christians, usually it won't tend to be Catholics. It's more likely to be evangelical, kind of Baptist-y sort of people, is they say, you see, the Qur'an uses or relates to some of the same stories that are found in the Bible. Therefore, it's plagiarism. Okay, that's one claim. Another claim is it quite clearly relates to many of the same stories, but told in a different way with a different emphasis. Therefore, it's incorrect. They want you to have both. And going back to the current flurry of opinions about, whether there are various versions of the Qur'an or whatever, often it's people are rather caught in the headlights of unspecified problem. When you break down the problem to look at its specifics, often it resolves itself. At the very least, it breaks it up into sort of digestible, manageable bits. That's been my experience. Anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning this, I'm just going to show you part of my Substack. Anyone, I think, now can read all of these. I do release some sort of more exhaustive work. With it's to paid subscribers on my Substack have access to it instantly. But I think these are now anybody can read them all. And this, if you want to look at this, and you have the patience to read. The Quran and earlier writings, this is the abstract for what I want to do. So this abstract presents in outline the areas of focus for a research project, the central features of which are the collation of texts which both predate the Quran and bear a narrative relation to it, and systematic comparison of those texts with the Quran. And the purpose is to derive conclusions which address, one, claims common among critics of the Quran, that it is derivative of other sources, and two, the Quran's own statements regarding its relation to earlier writings. Now, in order to do this, you really need a clear idea of what it is you're saying the Quran says, and most of that work has been done. However, what I found was that there were two sort of remaining problems separate to or remaining after all the previous work that's been done: the Quran, the complete revelation, the God protocol, and the mysterious letters of the Quran. Those three works, which you, as with all of my work, you can download free and print off at home on a home printer if you wish, or you can buy a hard copy. I'm not here to push books. I don't care if you buy it or not. But there is that option if you want it. What I realized is that what I'd done was I still hadn't really solved the rather important question of who the children of Israel are. And I'll provide links down below to this on my YouTube presentation. And I have a large, I think this is about 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 word, can't remember exactly, essay on this subject, applying some of the same principles of pan-textual analysis to the question of what the Quran means by the children of Israel. And it is an important question, because how can you address accusations or assertions to do with whether or not the Quran repeats previous scriptures if you're not clear on what the Quran itself means. So there's that, which you can read at your leisure should you wish to. And then there is the other question, which is, I felt might as well pick this one up while we're at it, which is to do with the narrative voice in the Quran. If you've read the Quran, certainly my translation, but not only my translation, not my translation alone, there are other translations which in fact, I would say all translations to some degree demonstrate this, even in English, of pronouns, how they change between I and we when it's regarding God. And it can be rather confusing. And I've made an initial analysis of this entire phenomenon through the Quran. It's a work in progress. But the initial sort of, thesis behind it, I think, is either correct or pretty close to being correct. And you can read that at your leisure. In short, I won't burden you with the details of that right now, but just to say that I've come to the conclusion this is a feature and not a bug. And if you want to get into the details of all of that, you're welcome to read my essay on that. Anyway, all that to say, I had another link somewhere I wanted to show you. And this can be accessed via Qur'anite.com if you go to resources, earlier writings. Because you need a data set, again, people get very emotional about things they don't have any facts about. Quite often, when you sit down and look at the actual facts, a lot of the problems resolve themselves just by posing the right questions. So what I've done here is essentially gathered as many of the previous scriptures as I can find. So I've found in English all of the Torah, the prophets, what are called the writings. Then we've got the Christian canon, and these link to. I wanted to have the full data set in a place where it's not going to get messed up by other people. The Apocrypha, Jewish legend, and there's some further collections, the lost books of the Bible, so-called forgotten books of Eden, etc. Nag Hammadi, and there's a ton of this stuff. Now, the reason why, and it took me a while to collate all of this, and some historical works, the reason why I collated all of this is because if I'm going to do a kind of a systematic analysis of where and how the Qur'an corresponds to and diverges from previous scriptures or writings, then we need to control the data that we're talking about. And also, it would help to be able to, wherever we quote, to be able to link to data that we control, so that if you can hyperlink into those quotes in context. I don't know where this project's going to go. I'm interested to see it. I do tend toward the view that the critics and the sort of quite a lot of the people who are blown about by every wind of doctrine really can be answered by the fact that the Qur'an itself says that it does confirm previous scriptures, but the more interesting question is, what do we actually mean by that? Now, rather than taking our definitions at the hands of people who perhaps are not, who don't have any respect for the Qur'an, it's much better if you can control that, and also to link to context, so that we actually have a data set, so that when these subjects come up, we can add to them and actually see them in context, rather than having them explained to us by people who perhaps are not, let's say, particularly even-handed when it comes to it. Now, I'm not here to, I have no preconceived ideas about where this is going to go. I'm just interested to see where it does go. All that to say, if you have come across a valid or an interesting accusation, or some sort of evangelical Christian or whoever it is, doesn't matter, it says, the Quran repeats a story from the Christians of Ephesus, or whatever it is, or the surah of the Al-Kahf, the companions of the cave. Well, this is based on such and such and such and such. Great. But if you put it in the comments of this YouTube video, or in the comments if you're a subscriber to my Substack channel, I don't need like a Talmud, just a few words and a link, and I'll have a quick look at it. And if it's valid, I'll add it to the project. I'm also finding my own. I don't know that I'll be able to address every single question, but I think that if we can hit usually the 80% of the actual problematical ones, and present some sort of structure whereby we can address these, or at least present a Quranic view on it, then people can make their own decisions on at whose hand or what information they're going to accept. I think that this would be a good repository and a good resource, because quite often, as I say, if you hear someone says, the Quran, copies something, it can make you feel like, perhaps it's not from God. However, if you actually look at the details, the actual details of what they're claiming, you quite often find that the result will confirm your faith rather than undermine it. I'm not here to, to beat a particular drum. I'm here to present, as far as I'm able, a sort of a resource that people can use to get specific answers quickly on the questions that trouble them, and where it's possible to pull together as much of this problematical material and analyze it together in a structured way. Because I think it's an important question, and it's most important to get past the vague generalities of the problem. A little bit like in the way that if you're walking down the street, the shaitan can make an unstudied woman seem like she's amazing and beautiful, but if you actually turn and look, in detail, you'll find that actually you weren't missing anything at all. I think I'm sure there's lots of very beautiful women in the world, but what a point that I'm making is that quite often, according to the Qur'an at least, the shaitan can make things seem far more significant than they actually are. And when you actually have the details, especially broken down into a structure, it can make the process of exposing those types of maneuvers much easier, and especially for those who don't have the type of time and tools to do this sort of work. This isn't specifically for Qur'an alone believers. It's for anybody who wants to use it. All of my work is free. So anyway, that's all of that. If in the next, I don't know, month, you watch this video and you think, yes, this question I've been told. It has to be quite specific, all right? Because I get a lot of general questions to me. The more specific you can make it, the better, especially if there's a link. Links tend to get stopped on my YouTube, but I'll see them. As long as they're to something sensible, I'll kind of punch them through so that other people can look as well. I'm not going to get into the weeds of debates between people. I'm just interested in subjects. I'll give you an example of where quite clearly there are differences. And I'm thinking just off the top of my head of Musa, of Moses. Now, in the Old Testament presentation, the Passover is one of the key signs or miracles to do with the freeing of the children of Israel from under the yoke of Pharaoh. In the Quran, there is no reference. There is no overt reference to the Passover, and that's significant. And I think that sort of thing should be noted. Now, obviously, some expositors will claim that something does relate to that, but it doesn't. It certainly doesn't do so specifically. And I think that there are theological consequences of that. If you think about how, for example, modern day Jews, I don't quite know what relationship they bear to the children of Israel, but let's assume that their self-identification is valid. The whole notion of the Passover is quite central to their self-conception as being special, and that the normal moral rules don't apply to them. We also see that Christians have arrogated to themselves a kind of, I suppose, a Passover of a different kind, albeit in a type of mystical figure, which they then arrogate to themselves. The fact that the Quran does not claim, does not state, does not feature a Passover at all as an event is significant, and it certainly is a difference. And what I want to do is to get into as much as possible, just by listing those differences, and perhaps considering briefly what the significance of those may be. In closing, there is no question that there is a difference. There are many, many differences between the Quran's presentation and that of previous scriptures and other writings. But I think that if we can somehow unpick this rather self-contradictory approach which people often feel on the back foot regarding which is the Qur'an. See, it's different, but it's the same. It uses the same stories, but here it's different. So it's wrong on both counts. Well, which is it? Which is it? The Qur'an itself says that it's from God. It says that it talks about previous scriptures, but it also says that it is a control over that. So that's important. And I think that it will give a resource to people where you can go, you're talking about this. Here we are. Here's the context. Bang, bang, bang. It will help people, at least help them reach conclusions which are intellectually sustainable for them. That's it. That's my presentation for today. If you've got, I don't want vague thoughts, I mean links to specific questions, links to specific accusations, especially from quote-unquote enemies of the Qur'an, great. That's what I want. I learnt more from quote-unquote enemies of the Qur'an than I ever learnt from people who claim the religion of Islam. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks in advance for your comments, and I'll leave it there. That's all. Bye for now.